Hello, Professor Arguelles.
Hello there, nice to see you again.
Today we're going to be talking about comparative religion. I'm very pleased about this for two reasons. For one, this general area has been a lifelong interest of mine. And for another, since January 2023, you have been my weekly tutor in the subject in your comparative historical religions reading group at the Arguelles Academy.
Mhm.
And I have derived great benefit, I must say, and enjoyment from that class.
As
So
have I. As have I. I mean, having somebody like you in the class is not like having you know, a student. It's like having somebody, and to share minds with and share information with. And that's true with some of the other people who've had with us too. So it's been a great experience, learning experience for me as well.
thank you. It's very generous of you. I thought we might begin with a reading, and I think you'll like this. It's from 1899,
Hmm.
and the writer is Louis G. Janes, and the article is The Comparative Study of Religions, Its Pitfalls, and Its Promise. And here it goes. Like sociology itself, the science of religion, based upon the comparative study of early and contemporaneous forms of religious belief, is still in its infancy, a science in the making, but already full of promise and hope for man. It is a science the materials for which have mainly been gathered during the past century, the possibility and opportunity for which have only recently dawned upon the human mind. Its full revelations are for the generations yet to be. Wonderful indeed, and full of deep significance already, are the results of the comparative study of religions, in their bearing not only on our understanding of the nature of religion, but on our comprehension of that form of religious faith which is our own inheritance. We are beginning to realize the full import of the statement of the venerable pioneer in comparative study, both in philology and in religion, Professor F. Max Müller of Oxford University, who quotes Goethe's paradox, "He who knows one language knows none," and declares that it is equally true that he who knows one religion knows none. So, my first question to you is, what is comparative religion? And in your opinion, has it lived up to the potential that Janes wrote of there?
Well, yeah, the question of terminology of what the discipline is called is something that is insoluble, and people have spent, I think, far too much time getting heated in arguments about, in particular, whether an S should be at the end. Should it be comparative religion or comparative religions, history of religion, history of religions? Um, Looking at the angle to take for studying religion has been, people have, yeah, it's been a thorny issue, cycling that out. But I think a lot of what that person, who was the author that you just read?
Louis G. Janes.
Louis G. James. Don't know that name, but a lot of what was said, yeah, rings true in terms of the aspiration of whatever you want to call it, history of religions, or comparative religion. The idea was and is that you need to know a lot, just like it's quite parallel to you, like half of the polyglot class that you took here, where I talk about language with a capital L, and languages being the languages that we learned. Compared to religion is similar. Religion, or history of religion, it was with capital R, and that is the phenomenon, the phenomenology of religion, or the sociology of religion, or the fact of religion, that it exists in human societies, that human beings have religion, that participate in religion, that everywhere you look, there is some form of religion. And so trying to understand that phenomenon as a whole is part of comparative religion or history of religions. But it's predicated upon needing to know, if not everything, nobody can ever know everything, but you need to have a very wide base and knowledge of particular religious traditions, be it something you can name like Christianity or Buddhism, or some sort of phenomenon like in the anthropology of religion, sort of like shamanism or animism, or different types of religion that are posited to have existed in different levels of society in different times. So at its best, it is a great aspiration to have wide-ranging knowledge, and to apply it, then to have a sort of a more abstract a concept of what religion is, and sort of study it as such, as a phenomenon. Um, and I think there was a time when it was sort of when the human mind in general, when scholarship in general was, sort of in its growth phase. You have a number of scholars who had an enormous erudition. We've read some of them, like Henry. The Golden Bough by Sir James Fraser. I mean, in the original multi-volume set, just incredible breadth of knowledge just went behind that and was in that. And I think that that continued into fairly recent times, but I think the discipline has fallen like all disciplines, as sort of academia has been, I think, watered down by what was mentioned there, lack of knowledge of languages and lack of knowledge in this case of people who want to, sort of have a broad base. I always felt, even when I was studying at the University of Chicago in the late 1980s and 1990s, I kind of felt that many people were kind of impatient to get to their own particular topic, want to treat the theory more broadly but without having enough of that broad foundation. And I do have that sort of general feeling that's the way scholarship, the institution of academia has gone in general into hyper specialization. And so I don't know that it's, continued to live up to its promise of, opening a glorious future for mankind. If that was really said, that's a bit of hyperbole there to begin with. But I think that there have been a number of really great books written from that perspective, things that we've read some of them, and there's a lot more that we can read and do plan on reading together. And so I think that, there's, if you know where to look and what kind of things to look in, you can find a lot of wisdom or insight into this phenomenon that's been compiled by people, whether you want to call them people in comparative religion or comparative mythology or history of religions, history of mythology, Religionswissenschaft, whatever you want to call it. It's sort of a broad umbrella term where you look at the phenomenon. So yeah, that's what it is.
In that excerpt I read, comparative religion, the study of that, is seen as a sort of emerging science. By that, I think he just means field of knowledge and investigation, and that many resources had just come to light in the last, or been gathered in the last century. And you've talked also here about a certain period in scholarship being the right conditions for something like this to emerge. I wonder if you might comment a bit on that period. What was it about that time period that you've pointed to, and Jane's also points to,
Mhm.
that was such fertile soil for something like comparative religion study to emerge?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the 19th century saw the emergence of all the, social sciences as such, and history of religions is usually sort of, if you try to slot it in an academic institution, where you're going to put it, you're going to put it with anthropology, you're going to put it with, it tends to go over there or into a divinity school. That's where it usually is lodged. So looking at where it belongs is phenomenal. So why did it emerge then? Well, that's because in all these types of fields emerge. And a lot of them, the names that are associated with these fields are sort of, they're cross-disciplinary because the disciplines didn't exist yet. So what F. Max Müller, he's the editor of the entire series of um, the sacred books of the East series that was just published in that time period, sort of huge ranging time period. They lived a long time, a lot of guys like this, and just devoted their entire lives to scholarship, and as a result produced these multi-volume works or multi-volume editorials and a lot of insights. Other names that you don't necessarily associate. Andrew Lang, I don't know what that name means to you. My first encounter with Andrew Lang, he's a great compiler of folk tale books, of fairy tale books for children, and so you see that name and then you realize he's actually a great name in comparative history of religions and had written a lot of things. One thing that attracted me to the idea of the field as a whole is because it has always been intimately related. These disciplines grew up together, and it used to be called comparative mythology. And comparative philology went hand in hand. The same people were there. I mean, in the time of the brothers Grimm, Jakob Grimm and Wilhelm Grimm, they wrote these tremendous books on Germanic mythology and on Germanic philology, hand in hand together. And so a lot of people who, sort of started these disciplines before they fragmented it into more specialized disciplines sort of overarched that. And there has been always, I think, um, more of a concern with knowing the original source languages in the field of comparative religions, history of religions, than there has been in many other fields. As a matter of fact, that's one thing that really attracted to me to it that I could go into, because I looked around and of all the things that I was interested in and could have gone into, this was the one that would require me and allow me to get the greatest linguistic breadth. So that's always been very attractive to it. It's the idea that you want to get to the source materials. So apart from that, I think that, there was still the mind of a lot of these scholars had still been trained in a fairly classical formal tradition, so that they were able to focus on material and just sort of think clearly, and apply themselves and work with diligence at something. And if you do that and you're not distracted and you can devote yourself entirely to something, I think it's anybody can achieve tremendous amounts. And I think that that's the circumstances were just right for a lot of these people to do. They had well-trained minds. They did. A lot of these sources were coming in from the things that are now the explorers and the colonizers going out into the world, sending back the missionaries, sending back reports. I mean, all of these things were being compiled in a way that hadn't been before, so they were accessible, and people were just able to do, just through tremendous amounts of scholarship, multi-volume tomes of, in-depth research over something that took decades. And there was just that, I think there was a mindset of that said, yes, let's do that. Let's focus more on, producing, lasting tomes than on just sort of conference presentations and articles, which is where the influence, the pressure is now on, on the life of an academic. I think there was just more of an expectation that books counted, books were important. You should, as a scholar, produce, significant books, whereas these days that's not so much the case anymore.
A criticism of that sort of a period of comparative religious study is that, well, there's a kind of implicit or maybe explicit ranking of world religions where the world religion of the cultural context of the writer, usually Christian or deist, sort of deist, maybe miscellaneous deist at the very least, rooted in the Western tradition, is seen as superior to both prior religious forms and also foreign religious forms. But I've been struck in reading several of these writers, reading their books, not reading about their books, but reading them in
Mhm.
particular, the degree of appreciation, enjoyment, respect, and also self-criticism of one's
Exactly.
own tradition
Exactly.
in these works. I was quite struck to find that.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I've always thought it's a shame that people want to write off these older books of this thing with that sort of contemporary lens that, oh, this is the fruit of colonialism, so we shouldn't pick it, or something like that. Well, I mean, here's where the knowledge was, and if you're assuming that these people were, sort of having um, attitudes that we no longer approve of, well, go and actually read the books, and like you just said, you'll find that that's not necessarily the case, not necessarily the case at all.
You've mentioned your own interest in comparative religion. I wonder if we might talk about your background in it. And that's intimately linked, of course, to your doctoral training in University of Chicago. And I'm very
Mhm.
interested to hear about that, particularly the first couple of years or several years of that doctoral training involved a rigorous reading requirement with qualifying exams, and that I'd be curious if you'd say a little bit about that process and maybe about your doctorate overall.
Okay, sure. Again, so I'm not giving up-to-date information about the program at the University of Chicago. This is 30 years, yeah, about 30-year-old information here. But it's just my experience, what I had there. I assume it's pretty much the same, but things have certainly changed. So yeah, the doctoral process there is that you have a couple of years of coursework, language work and other coursework, but before you can write your dissertation, start be admitted to dissertation, you have to pass what's called the qualifying exams. And the qualifying exams have um, I think there were five different exams that are in the different fields. So I had one in history of religions, one in history of Christianity. I forget what the others were. Sort of like in the subfields of the divinity school at the University of Chicago. The names of the departments: psychology of religion, religion and literature. So there are a number of different reading lists. And the idea for these exams is that you're just supposed to become familiar with the content of the books on the reading list, and there are a lot of them. There might be, maybe 100 books. There's 20 books per list, five lists. You might have to know the content of 100 books, and this is when you feel comfortable knowing that, when you can show that you're conversant with the content of them by discussing the ideas that they contain, not in specifics, but in broad outlines, so that you can come to a period when the exam period is about a week, and every day you just sit and write essays all day, sort of comparing and contrasting, what would Fraser say about Mueller on this, or how would they think, and just showing that you have the broad outline to talk about things in breadth. And when with hindsight, I think it was a very valuable process. I enjoyed it. It was, enjoyed I profited from it. But unfortunately, it's rather a lonely process. There aren't classes involved with it. And this is the stage when a lot of people fell out of the program because you're supposed to do it within a certain period of time, but it's not a problem to get an extension. And people would, because you're going off, you're no longer doing classes, people would get lives. They would get married, get more involved with their jobs, maybe have children, and just sort of something that they were doing and seemed very important to them would sort of be put aside. And for a lot of people, it just never got back on the burner. So I think this is a stage when a lot of people sort of ended up flying or just sort of leaving the program eventually because of that. But if you could get through that and do that, read all these exams, I think it was very, reading all these books and writing about them in exams, I think it was a very valuable process. And so that was one of the ideas of mine for coming up at the course here in the Academy in Comparative History of Religions, is that we have a number of people who are interested, and some are in the divinity school right now, who are interested in doing that kind of thing. And I thought, well, it'd be helpful to give them a head start in doing that. And I haven't revised or reread some of these books myself in a long time, and I thought that would be good. And then there's people like you that it's great to discuss these things with. So the books that we've read thus far were all pretty much taken from or inspired from the reading lists that I had. And so that's sort of the genesis of the idea, is that, well, we can read the same books that are on some of those lists as a small circle here or a small group here. So that's what we've been doing.
And just for completeness sake, I wonder if you might say what you did go on to do
Oh,
for your, yeah.
Oh, I see. Yes. Sorry, I forgot. So yeah, so I did manage to pass these qualifying exams, and so I was able to propose my dissertation and write it up and do it. And so my doctoral dissertation was called Viking Dreams, the um, mythological and religious dream symbolism in the Old Norse sagas. Viking dreams, mythological and religious dream symbolism in the Old Norse sagas, and it was what I just said. It was about the uh, in Iceland, the Icelanders declared themselves officially a Christian nation about the year 999 or 1000, so that the king of Norway, who was consolidating his power, wouldn't send missionaries out there to forcibly convert them. So they said, even though the majority of us are still pagan and practice the old religion, we're going to declare ourselves an officially Christian country so we don't get invaded, because we all came here to escape this anyway. So let us anybody who wants to keep practicing the old religion, you can certainly do it, but let's kind of be quiet and discreet about it. And so Iceland declared itself a non-pagan nation about 200 or 300 years before it actually became a true Christian nation. And in that time period, 1100, 1200, 1300, is when Icelandic literature, Old Norse literature, was at its greatest, its height. The Old Norse sagas are considered to be, by many, to be, real monuments in world literature. And in the sagas, there are a lot of dreams. This is a society that valued dreams and dream interpretation and doing this. And so you could write about dreams. And in a dream, you could say, I dreamed about Thor. And that would be a way that you could talk about the old gods, the old religion. So a lot of the dream content, there are a lot of dreams that are narrated in the sagas. And a lot of the dreams have content that's taken from the old Germanic mythology, the old pagan mythology. So Thor and Wotan and all this kind of thing. So I sort of looked at that. I culled all those dreams out of the various sagas and categorized them and talked about them. I also looked at dream interpretation in the Middle Ages in general, comparing it with some other traditions, the Latin dream book interpretation, some dreams in Middle High German literature as well. So um, it was very interesting at the time. It was great to sort of do, on the basis of the knowledge that I had from that qualifying exam and the breadth of knowledge I had gotten of various religious traditions, then to focus in on sort of how this one society got transformed from having one type of religion, one type of religiosity, to another type, and to do that in a comparative historical context, and to focus on that, and to really plunge into reading Old Norse intensively. So after I spent a couple of years on the for the qualifying exams, and I spent the next couple year and a half, maybe 2 years, just reading Old Norse literature and getting really, really good in that, and then writing it up. So yeah, it was a good experience.
Yeah, we should definitely do an interview about that someday. That sounds very cool, picking
Mhm.
that apart. Yeah. So, from a methodological point of view, in terms of teaching comparative religion, the group that you're running that I've enjoyed being a part of since beginning of 2023, we're reading some of the main works of comparative religion and becoming that way familiar with the field, and of course learning about religions at the same time. That might not be the most intuitive route for an autodidact. An autodidact might say, okay, let me get all the sacred scriptures of all the religions and learn about them that way. Or let me find some other, make some sort of reading list for each religion individually, going, they might think, to the source in that way. So I wonder, what is the value of the approach we've taken of reading the major works of comparative religion last century and a half, couple of centuries, whatever. What's the value of doing that? Is it in opposition to this idea of trolling the primary sources and reading like that? Might it obstruct that process?
No, and not at all. And I was thinking maybe going forward, we might combine all three of those approaches. Thus far, we've read Mircea Eliade's Encyclopedia, the Dictionary of Religions, no, the History of Religious Ideas, correct? History of Religious Ideas, and then Fraser's Golden Bough, and now we're reading William James's Varieties of Religious Experience, three two major classics, and then Eliade himself has named many things that he wrote. He's the sort of the main figure in History of Religions, and that History of Religious Ideas did. We remember that we read, and then we read the second book, the what was it, the Culianu edited uh, sort of shorter version that was designed. Both of those had in the preface, this is meant to be a handbook, so as to give this person a general overview of all the specific religious traditions. But yeah, I think that we can and should, if we continue this, and I hope to, maybe alternate between reading a book like this and a book that takes in turn a major religious tradition, a major major cultural historical period, and just shore that up. And certainly I mentioned Max Muller's Sacred Books of the East collection. Read some texts for that or some other spiritual classics as well to mix all that together. We were using the Sacred Books of the East for sort of like we have the Great Books of the West in a separate reading circle for that from the very beginning of the Academy, but that just somehow didn't have quite enough people and other things were happening, and maybe it can morph into this and be merged with that, and we could have a combination of those three different types of readings.
For myself, reading these books, they've definitely been very stimulating. I'm thinking Eliade, yes, certainly, Culianu. In particular, I'd say Fraser and William James, Varieties of Religious Experience, or Golden Bough by Fraser. Really remarkable to gain an insight into very well read, well thought through perspectives on comparative religion. Of course, they're only a perspective, and they're from a certain time and from a certain point of view. But that's should be, I think, given that that's the case. But very interesting to do that. And we've been reading recently William James, The Varieties of Religious Experience, which is a classic of the psychology of religion.
Mm-hmm.
And that has, it could have been written yesterday, I think, a great deal of that. Maybe some of the references and some of the quotes and so on may not be the ones we use today, but his prose itself and his
Mm-hmm.
considerations and the points he makes could have been written yesterday. And I personally find it quite thrilling even to read these sorts of books. And I do think it complements a rigorous reading of the source material.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have here, I was thinking, I was looking at this here, you're going to have to, if you really want to get into history of religions, you need to learn French. You need to be able to read French. So much of the important work, I mean, Culianu and Eliade started writing in French. They were Romanian. There's Georges Dumézil, there's Émile Durkheim. There's so many great French uh, and German too. One of the requirements of the University of Chicago is that you should be able to read French and German for the purpose of reading these things, but that was never sort of enforced. You passed the exam and then you were never held to reading this. They didn't put books in French and German on the reading list. I'd like to have that be the case here. We're not going to shy away from something because it's in French or German. And in French in particular, there's this wonderful history, Histoire des religions, Encyclopédie de la Pléiade, in 3 volumes that just really goes in great detail systematically in the same treatment of, all, the complete history of religions all throughout the world. So I don't know, maybe we could take something like this as a handbook and read, a little bit about specific traditions at the same time. I know you're very interested in mystical type experiences, mysticism. We could read some classics of mystical thought as well. But yeah, I do think it's helpful to have this, as you said, different approaches, interdisciplinary perspective on a big phenomenon like religion with the capital R. I do think you have to have all the different types of approaches. So William James is for the psychology of religion. I guess we could put Fraser, because he's one of the founders of anthropology, sort of being the anthropology of religion. Another book like this that I'd like for us to look at is by a guy named Joachim Bach, and he was a sociologist, so he has the sociology of religion. And then there was a Dutchman, Gerardus van der Reeuw, and he was a phenomenologist, so he had a phenomenology of religion. There's a wonderful 2 volume set, just all the specific details about what is this ritual, what is this rite, what is this kind of thing, sort of the tactile, the phenomenon of looking at these kind of things. And then I mentioned Georges de Mézil, who has this overarching sort of philosophy of the ideology, the tripartite ideology of the Indo-Europeans, and just wonderful texts about Mithra and Varuna, comparing and contrasting ancient Vedic and ancient Iranian traditions and that kind of thing. So it's just like with language learning, everything else, this is a lifelong process of learning and getting a wider and wider and bigger perspective. So yes, I think that it would be dry and sterile just to stay reading only these sort of sociology, philosophy, this kind of things, without ever looking at specific traditions. But I think if you just look at specific traditions, you don't know what you're looking at. You have to have this sort of broad perspective. So yeah, weaving them together and maybe sometimes going to some classical texts, source books, would be a good thing.
Yes, and I think going straight to the primary sources, which is of course so necessary, but going straight to it without any reference to anything else, one can end up mistaking one's own lens as a clear, objective view, and you read each tradition pretty much through your own filter. And
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the great things about reading people like Fraser and James, is that whilst one might not agree with everything that they say, or one might not share all their assumptions and so on, at least you learn to look at things from a different angle, and that I think is very valuable. And that's also something about the class. So I wonder if we might talk a bit about the format of the class, because from what we've said so far, I mean, it's very exciting format. We read these books, we discuss them, and it's great. But you don't need to be like you, a PhD in these things with training in University of Chicago. We do have people who are in academic training of various types or experts in various things. But there also we have pathological enthusiasts such as myself in the
Mm-hmm.
group, and so anyone can join and discuss. And that's, I think, part of the interest of it is that everyone brings their own particular perspective and reactions. And sometimes we have debates, and sometimes, well, all the time actually, I learn something from what's discussed. So I wonder if you might talk about the rationale behind the format of the class, how it is you run the thing, and how it is that you include people who have both great deal of training, such as yourself, but just enthusiasts also.
Um, I can't take the credit for that. I give that to you. I give that to the participants. I give it to the nature of the people that we have so far who are, serious adult learners who, are endeavoring to continue expanding their minds and keep learning, throughout life, not necessarily pursuing it. We do have people who are in degree programs, not here, but, not necessarily pursuing a particular degree, but pursuing knowledge, pursuing, understanding. And so that's the kind of people that we have. And so I don't think that, I try very hard not to uh, sort of dominate. I just, I'm the oldest. I have the most knowledge and the most experience because I'm the oldest. So, that doesn't mean that I'm right in any particular perspective. It means, oh, if we need a historical fact, I'll probably be the one that is, it might be able to pull it out of my brain. But yeah, I mean, far more about anything in Buddhism period, in Tibet, the whole area that you are. And we've got other people who are, doing was it Buddhist philosophy, and we'd have people who are interested in other various traditions as well. So I just think the entire atmosphere is a very congenial one. That we're very fortunate to have that, in contrast to some other places where I've been in formats, and there's ego involved and people trying to sort of prove they're right and have an axe to grind, and we just haven't attracted people like that. So we've got a bunch of people who everybody's really interested in learning something, and so it's just a congenial format that's developing with this new, relatively new phenomenon of interacting with other human beings, not live and in person, but in Zoom rectangles like we're doing right now. And with the kind of people we have, the kind of material we have, it just works really well. I say, okay, what do we want to read next? And we agree. And then I say, okay, can we read this much for next week? Let's all do it. And in the same spirit of those first exams, the idea is we're coming to, show that we, not mastered something or have it down, but we've got those ideas in our head. We can, sort of play around with them and understand what they're trying to say and compare and contrast them with the other ideas. And so it just works out quite well. I'm very happy with the way we've been doing it.
Yes, and humorous, I'll also add. We have a good laugh. I think a lot of times with religion, if you don't laugh, you will cry. So we we have a good laugh about things too, between each other. So it's a good time, I think, to join the class because we're finishing up William James' Varieties of Religious Experience. We're almost finished with that, a few more chapters to go. And
Mhm.
then, like you said, it's sort of open season on where we're going to go next. So
Mhm.
it's a good time to join and influence that.
Yeah, with my entire approach for all the things that I do in the academy is like I'll suggest something, and well, in the great books I kind of have it in my mind that a good order for us to go through, but that's because we already have a set that we're working with. But with something like this where we don't have, something is set on a reading list, I don't want to impose the reading. I want to know what people want to read, and we'll come to a consensus and work through that. I'll make the suggestions of a number of choices, and everybody can choose what we should do.
So for the interested new person who might be listening to this and think, this sounds right up my street, what are some of the options? And you will accept, of course, other ideas, but what are some of the options to tantalize them a little, maybe?
Um, well, um, a great, maybe one of the next things, but just a suggestion from what we've looked at in James, it might be interesting to go on to Emile Durkheim, Sociology of Religion, the Elementary Forms of Religious Life, about functionalism and the function that religious plays in society and that kind of thing. That's a interesting, important perspective that is intriguing to some people. Another thing, again, I'm open to things that people find interesting as a group. So it should aver that we have a bunch of people who would really like to tackle Joseph Campbell's, say, the hero's journey, the hero with 1,000 faces, all 4 volumes of that, and looking into a great deal what's really being said and discussed there. If that's what the group wanted to do, that's what I'd be happy to do with them. As I said, I mean, then maybe these names aren't so well known, but if I just reflect back, when I think back now on my reading list, and I say, God, what books gave me the most sort of bang for my buck? Yes, that book I mentioned by Van der Leeuw of the phenomenology of religion, just going into detail. What is a rite? What is a ritual? What is, what are these different kinds of sacrifices and that kind of thing? Really just sort of analyzing that I found very valuable. Um, but yeah, now that you mentioned it, I would not mind either saying, because, for example, we have a couple of people now who are well, you're in different types of Buddhism, and as we discussed by reading through Eliade, Buddhism is really a sort of a collective concept rather than that. But still, we can get in a book like this history of religions or Buddhism, something to focus on a specific tradition, maybe that one, so that we have knowledge of collective knowledge of what we're talking about there, or some classic. It would be really up to you and Xinghao and the other people who are in it, and anybody who might want to join to say, okay, that sounds interesting. This idea sounds interesting to me, and I'd like to read this. If I would not mind if people wanted to read Georges Dumézil and said, let's go into this, because some of the stuff, just like the stuff in the great books, it's very interesting, but it's certainly not classic work that is like, you need to really sit together with other people and put your heads together and say, what did we just read as we had yesterday? People had a hard time getting into starting Virgil. It was hard to make the shift and look at epic poetry and sort of follow the story along. When we get to in the great books, when we get to Plato, it'll certainly be that. What are we reading? How do we understand this? What do we make sense of this? It's not that degree of sort of analysis that's required in this class, the history of religions class, but I think that it is very helpful to just talk out the things that you've been reading. These are rather abstract concepts sometimes, and we get a lot of details and information to make sure that we understand them, to articulate them and talk about them with others who also just read them. I think is a very, very helpful format.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. And I'd like to reiterate, I got so much value and benefit as well as enjoyment from this particular class, and I'd encourage anyone who's curious about it to come and give it a try. Where can people sign up? Where's the place they can go if they would like to join the class and give it a shot?
Okay, well, first of all, I'd just like to, I mean, anybody who was like, it just goes for all the classes in the academy. I mean, anybody's welcome to, just, you don't have to like sign up right away. You can always come as a guest once or twice and see if you like it, if it's right for you. We're always happy to have people do that. So, there's just go to the academy page, the academy contact page, and write to the contact person there, and that is Xing Hao, who's in this class, who's and is at the University of Chicago and is in India right now studying Sanskrit, so he can do more with his philosophy of Buddhism, but he's also the person who will answer you that and send you information about the link to come to the class or how to sign up if you care to do that.
And that's at alexanderarguelles.com.
Mhm.
Okay. Professor Arguelles, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.